Welcome everyone to another episode of KIWI Talks. My guest today, I'm a huge fan of, and I think he's underappreciated in my opinion, but he is the current lead producer at Deck 9 Games, but you probably know him best from his tenure at Retro Studios. He's worked on Prime 2, Prime 3, Donkey Kong Country Returns, and Mario Kart 7. He is the only one. Bryan Walker, how you doing?
Good. Thank you so much for reaching out to me today, Reese.
No worries. I appreciate it. I appreciate you taking the time out. I know you're a very busy man. So first thing I wanted to cover off with you is because you joined Retro Studios right after Metroid Prime came out, I imagine, right? And at this stage, it had already become the highest selling Metroid game and was one of the highest rated games of all time on Metacritic. Was there a bit of anxiety on your end when you joined because you're like, wow, okay, I have to manage these guys and try and help them at least hit the same bar as they did on the first game?
Yeah, there was some anxiety. I had been very fortunate up to that point to work with some real heavy hitters in the industry, such as Richard Garriott and Sid Meier, having had the opportunity of working alongside them and being mentored by one of the most underappreciated executives in the history of the industry, Bing Gordon. I knew what great looked like, but I also understood and have always had in the back of my mind the quote from one of my mentors also, and one of the best executive producers I ever worked with, Rob Martin, who said, if you think you think failure is hard, try success. And that came from his experience at Maxis, following up on The Sims. So I had no delusions about the level of challenge that we would face at Retro, taking it to the next level and continue to build on the success that they saw of Metroid Prime. But it was a day-to-day challenge across the board.
Yeah, because I'm a creative person. So I can only imagine how hard it would be to manage creatives because of the fact that creatives tend to be super sensitive, generally, can sometimes have a bit of an ego, not always. So how do you, from a project management standpoint, how do you get them all to kind of work together to not be any type of envy between the different members and just to really, really form that camaraderie and bring out the best in all of them?
That was one of the challenges that we faced as I stepped in there at Retro Studios, was to help put the team as a whole on a path from the cultural and procedural and professional standpoint to correct from what had been years of unfortunately toxic and very dysfunctional operation. They were a team of fiercely talented and exceptionally experienced developers who had gone through a really, really tough stretch getting Metroid Prime out. Retro Studios had these grand dreams when they started with all these different projects, and one by one the projects faltered. They fell away for a variety of reasons, and then it came down to an entire team from a studio that was at one point over 300, if I recall correctly, being trimmed down to about 40 developers. That's hard. That by itself is hard. And then the challenge of taking a game that was at the time called Metaforce, transforming that game upon the absolutely ingenious direction of Mr. Miyamoto, transforming that game to the Metroid Prime franchise. That's a lot of turbulence for creative people to experience, seeing things that they were so vested in either be canceled or heavily transformed. But it worked out. The downside is the team was in a very bad place when I got there, and helping them understand what's in the past stayed in the past, but what's in the future is what we as a team could directly impact. And it was not, okay, they did this to us, or he said that to us, or she did this. It was, what can we do as a team to build on the success of what was a brilliant title and take the studio to an entirely different level. And that was a long journey, but it was very gratifying.
Hmm. So what's it like to sit in some of these meetings with all these creatives? The caliber of individual you worked with at the time was obviously next level, but all these guys and girls throwing different ideas out, and you're hearing all these different ideas, and then having to work out what's going to end up on the cutting room floor and what you focus on.
It's the three most important aspects of any development team that I've worked with has been the fundamentals of respect, resourcefulness, and I think perhaps most importantly, depending upon where you are in the development process, resilience. As a team and as individuals, they have to be passionate, but they also have to be flexible as they see what they thought was a fantastic idea absolutely ripped to shreds by somebody else. But on the other hand, that process of ripping it to shreds, was that delivered professionally and respectfully? Was that thought about objectively, or were there enmities involved and bad blood from prior examples? Moving past that kind of nonsense, I kind of refer to that as kind of the 90s mindset, where the creative process was a brawl, and it took the person who shouted the loudest or was the most Machiavellian in their maneuvers to get their idea forward. We're done with that. The creative process now, as much as a lot of the fans like to think it's kind of the Cirque du Soleil with all kinds of colorful, amazing things flying around all the time, the creative process is absolutely an agonizing step-by-step consideration of verbal and technical trial and error. You come up with an idea, you verbally bounce it off of other people, get their perspectives, then you do a prototype, little prototype. Did it work? Okay, that worked. Okay, let's take it to the next level. Let's involve some engineering. Let's take it to a larger scale prototype. Oh, it didn't work. Okay, here's why. It's using too much memory. It's going to blow out our budget. Okay, let's start from scratch. That cycle of having the carrot dangled in front of creative people and then yanked away for any reason is tough. And it takes a very special breed of developer who can roll with that. And that's the environment that we gradually built at Retro Studios over the years.
I did read about, and I've heard a lot of rumors online, and you see artwork. And so like Ridley, for example, was originally an idea that was in Prime 2 and it got scrapped. Was there a particular reason why it was scrapped? It was just budget or time constraints?
Well, Ridley was in Prime 2. I think you're maybe referring to Craig, perhaps?
No, Ridley was in Prime 1 and he's in Prime 3.
1, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Pardon me. Yeah. There in Prime 2, we wanted to introduce some more characters and especially some of the bosses, and that's really, I think, one of the strengths of the Prime series has been the design and the experiences that the bosses represent. We had the good fortune of having excellent tools to work with for the developers and the engineers to create the boss encounters. But we also had the assistance of Mr. Tanabe, who, if he could only do one thing, boss design would be it. He is just at a absolutely super genius level of design capability for what the pacing and the challenge and the flow of a boss encounter looks like. All of the boss encounters in not just the Prime series, but also the DK series as well, really benefited from his involvement.
Is there something specifically that he says or he does that?
It's one of these kind of a beautiful mind type of things where we're looking, I'm a mediocre designer on a good day. I'm looking at an encounter on a screen, and you can tell that he's seeing the matrix behind that. He's seeing the specific timings and the opportunities and how to interject the tempos up and down. And his feedback was a true honor learning from how he developed the boss. And sometimes it was literally just making a timing, 0.2 seconds difference in a particular how a particular attack happened, or a tell for an attack, a telegraph would be displayed. Those tiny little details that he had a talent for uncovering were really something to see as he went through his process.
Because it's well documented now that you could never beat the Boost Ball Guardian.
Okay. I have to confess, I said that, and at the time I was probably irritated because I wasn't able to beat it. I did eventually beat
it. Nice. Okay.
And I did it without the debug mode. I was so heads down. Okay, this is my excuse. I'm so heads down working on the nuts and bolts of the project. That's my boss encounter, managing the workflows and the pipelines and the schedules and keeping everybody from fighting with each other. I just sometimes didn't have very much time over the course of a day to sit down and pick up a controller and play the game. So that's my story. I'm sticking with it.
Okay, fair enough. Well, that's good to hear that you beat it. That's good. We could put that rumor to rest. That's good. So, given your background in the military, did you actually have any influence over the design of, say, the Galactic Federation Marines in Prime 2 or Prime 3?
Very. In fact, I remember in as we were designing some of their encampments, Mark Pacini came up and asked me, what a military encampment would look like, and I talked about how it would be arranged in a triangular fashion with your fuel and ammunition at different parts of the triangle, and the pure steel planking on the ground or everything. But other than that, just really minimal. I think at one point I was a Galactic Federation trooper saying "Stand to, Samus" during Prime 3. That was the extent of how much knowledge I threw in from a military standpoint, which I was always kind of hoping for a chance to do more with the Galactic Federation in the Prime series, but it perhaps Prime 4 will have it.
Yeah. So is there much, because, with there's obviously quite a change between Prime 2 and Prime 3. And when you're talking about budgets, I mean, voice acting raises the budget quite substantially, right? And because I think a lot of people often forget is you have to record the voicing in not only English, but Japanese. And that's not to mention all the different languages in Europe. Does that become quite a bit of a problem?
It is a coordination challenge at times, yes. Not a problem if you have good people working in concert to make that happen. And we had at Retro Studios, and I think he's still there, in fact, Scott Peterson, who was, I can extend to him as the audio director the highest compliment I could ever extend to any developer, is that if it was on his plate, if we issued the assignments to Scott, consider it done. Walk away, focus on something else, because it would be done on time at a higher level of quality than you expected. And Scott's coordination of the voice acting, the music, the sound effects, coordinating with the audio teams and music teams in Japan, he made my life as a development director so much easier, because I didn't have to worry about those details. Put it on Scott's plate. It was done, and it was done fantastic. Oh,
wow. Now, you're the guy that pitched to Nintendo to do the compilation trilogy.
Yes. I'm very much not a me kind of person at any stretch, but that one was mine. That was a fun project.
So how did you pitch it to Nintendo? Because if they can find a way to release something one by one at a $60 price point or $100 price point here in New Zealand, but they will do that. So did it take much to convince them?
No, surprisingly. And I think it represented a opportunity to take what were already great games in Prime 1 and Prime 2 and adapt them to the Wii controller, the Wii remote. The gameplay experience was enhanced so much in my mind that really by itself justified the compilation.
Yeah. Wow. Was it quite streamlined though, in terms of from the time you pitched it to the time that it was released?
Surprisingly fast, yeah. Very, very little hair pulling had to happen for that one to move forward.
So tell me how you guys ended up getting Donkey Kong Country Returns, because that seems like a total tonal shift, right? From like a first-person adventure to a bubbly, cartoony platformer.
So after Prime 2, Retro was really trying to think of what we wanted to move forward with, what was next. We were starting to feel franchise fatigue with the Prime series. And we took a look at a variety of different IPs within the Nintendo stable, and DK came up at the point. And from what I recall, it was forwarded to Mr. Iwata, who said, we really want Prime 3 with its as a first-person game to show off the new platform, to show off the power of the Wii remote. And that was a good reason. We understood the corporate strategy, so we transitioned from Prime 2 to Prime 3. At the end of Prime 3, of course, this was well documented. As that was winding down, we had the design director, Mark Pacini, the art director, Todd Keller, and our technical director, Jack Matthews. They spun out to form Armature. And this was jarring for the team, because these were not just, highly respected leaders, but these were our friends. These are, we had been in the trenches with these guys for a long time. And we also suffered at the time a huge cultural setback with the team, of the loss of Mark Haig Hutchinson, who we lost to pancreatic cancer. That was really hard. And it just really didn't feel right from a creative standpoint, a cultural standpoint, to immediately move forward into another Prime game at the time. And there was a lot of conversations going. So I'm probably, just over time, I'm probably munging a lot of the details. But the DK IP bubbled up as one that was ready for a revisitation, and not just DK, because there had been other games with him, such as Donkey Kong Konga and so forth, but the Donkey Kong Country IP, which was a hugely successful game on the SNES. And so we got the shot, and this game, the Donkey Kong Country Returns on the Wii for Retro Studios, really was, in my time there, really was the high point, because it was the result of so many different things that we had worked on with the studios to improve our processes, to improve our tools, to improve our interfaces with our Japanese partners, to think outside of what we were comfortable with. That said, when we started doing some art mock-ups, we got some palm trees that looked exactly like something you would see in Metroid Prime. It's very, very sullen, dark, edgy, menacing palm trees. So, but we learned very quickly, and we started to understand that we turned up the saturation. We added some deformation, some chibi, some whimsy to it, and perhaps the most a pivotal aspect was having the chance to sit down with Mr. Miyamoto and get an understanding from him what he wanted to see, what he hoped to see with DK. And he never at any time stood up and said, "This is what it will have. This is your checklist. This is what I want, period." He just offered feedback and guidance and mentorship. And that's one of the things that made Mr. Miyamoto so valuable as a resource, is that he could be incredibly demanding at times. And there have been plenty of occasions where he just flipped the table over and said, "Start again." But he was you could tell that he wanted this game to happen, that he wanted to see DK in a new adventure. And, in fact, I'll never forget, as we were wrapping up our conversation with him in Kyoto, he said in English, "Please take care of DK. He is my friend."
Oh.
No pressure.
Yeah.
No pressure. When the guy who pretty much invented the video game industry as we know it passes that along, and that was just like a it was like a beam from heaven came and hit us in the forehead. Okay, we now have the mission, is to not just make a game that was better than the original Donkey Kong Country, but make a game that was better than everybody's memories of Donkey Kong Country. And that is a much taller order. That is a much taller order.
Yeah, I imagine. And like, I think some people have this idea that moving from, say, something like Metroid Prime into a platformer is actually easier, but it just presents a whole new set of challenges, doesn't it?
It was the transition from a technical standpoint was not as hard because thanks to our fantastic engineers, we had a very robust tool set and a very flexible renderer, camera system. Again, calling back to the fantastic work of Mark Hage Hutchinson. And we were able to create prototypes with remarkable speed as a result. And Nintendo is all about making a prototype. You can throw fancy illustrations and storyboards at them all day. They're not impressed until they can play it. And we were able to get playable prototypes. Basically, DK jumping around gray boxes scattered all over the place. We were able to get these prototypes in front of them very quickly and then just soak up that feedback. And this feedback was down to the pixel level. Try this, change the ground pounding cadence, one more pixel here, give him the ability to perch and lean over, these blocks. And it was just this steady stream of really valuable guidance that these early prototypes were able to bring forth that made the project as a whole much more straightforward than if we had been with any other publisher, I'm convinced.
Because you've obviously worked for different gaming companies. Because I'm pretty sure not all of them would want that, right? They want to. Nope. Some want to pitch via a story or an outline as opposed to a prototype.
One of the larger publishers I worked with previously, used to joke if your design document, your initial design document, wasn't the thickness of a phone book, keep trying.
What?
Yes, and they would literally joke as we sat down for the design document review process. This feels about right. As they're literally, holding 300 or 400 pages in their hands. Yeah, this feels about right. That represented the amount of diligence that a team was supposed to have put into the process before even they got into a prototype. That's the difference between the Nintendo process and a lot of other developers, I'm sorry to say.
Yeah. So I suppose, did you ever challenge it in any of the other publishers? Like, why are we doing it this way?
That was the never-ending story. many challenge on that. But we're fortunate in a lot of ways that the standardization of the technologies, the engines such as Unreal, Unity, and so forth, have made the prototype process so much more accessible and so much faster. You don't have to worry about creating your collision system or your renderer or your rasterizer. It's there already. You'd start with that. And back 20 years ago, you were writing these things from scratch. And if you were lucky, you used Granny as your one of the off-the-shelf sound systems, and that was as much of a head start as you could enjoy. The accessibility of prototypes now, and rapid prototyping in particular, is much greater than it used to be.
So, did you still have to do, since Prime 2 and Prime 3 were obviously based on the same or the foundations of Prime, did you still have to do another prototype per se, or you just like basically adding elements and saying, well, this is what we want to do with this particular title?
There was with Prime 3, for instance, Mark Pacini, who a shout out to Mark, I've had a chance to work with some fantastic design directors over the years. Mark stands at the very top. His resourcefulness and his insight, his professional bearing, his creativity, of course, and his diplomacy was remarkable. And Retro Studios owes a great deal of its success to that individual, Mark Pacini. So I don't, he's, he'll probably send me nasty emails, feeling self-conscious that I signaled him out. But Mark came forward with an interesting twist in the vision and some of the formulas for Metroid Prime 3 as compared to Metroid Prime 2. We wanted to a greater degree, leverage the ship as a playable asset, for instance. And we had that to some degree in Prime 3, but Mark was thinking much more ambitiously. Perhaps there was also an open world, less linear consideration that he was proposing, that the team was excited about. And we weren't able to prototype a lot of those because those were really big. We did have some ship prototypes early, but the open world one was much bigger. But those were ones that we had to do some dancing. In fact, Mark had printed out as one of his visual aids this origami Samus ship. He had taken the mesh of the Samus ship and used a program that basically unfolded it into what he could then turn into a paper model. So we had this cardboard Samus ship that he had colored in, and it looked great. It was, I think we could sell it today. but he kind of had that as a mascot during some of his presentations, and that was cool. That was I think an area where we may have fallen short of our goals with Prime 3 and not being able to expand the formula a bit. We're still very, very proud of Prime 3. It turned, it was a fantastic game, but I would be very interested in seeing what the response was, especially the fan community, to the expanded use of the ship and the more open world, non-linear experience that we were touching upon with that pitch.
I think Prime 3 just goes in a different direction. Some people like it, some people don't. But then I think from a creative standpoint, you guys don't want to rest on the laurels and just copy Metroid Prime or Super Metroid all the time, right? Because that would be exactly. Creatively, it would kill you. You'd become stagnant. So I still think it's a great game. I do find it interesting, the original intent, but these things never go according to plan, I'm sure. There's always curveballs.
The most resonant vision within the Nintendo design and development culture is the slogan, to surprise and delight the player. In that simply, to surprise and delight the player. And so there's always going to be innovation. There's always going to be pushing the envelope and shaking things up, regardless of the IP. It was something that I was really I'm really curious to see what any additional movement to expand the Prime envelope in the formula for Prime 4, perhaps, how that's received by the fan community.
Yeah. I did want to ask you about your interactions with Satoru Iwata. I'm not sure how many interactions you had with him, but what was your experience?
He was the most gracious and thoughtful, well-spoken, and inspiring CEO I've ever been around. I'll pass along an anecdote for you. We were at E3 as the first year that we were demoing Prime 2. Mark Pacini, and I were in the break room sitting down. We had been on the floor watching people play and enjoying that a lot. And suddenly our Japanese partners that we were talking with, they stiffened a little bit, and we turned around and there was Mr. Iwata. Mark and I had never spoken to him. He had just really come on recently. And he bowed deeply to us and said, "I want to personally thank you for all the hard work that you put into this demo. It looks amazing." And
wow.
Yeah, I had just come from from another publisher where you're not going to get a comment like that out of the CEO. So we were both taken aback, really. But that was the kind of person that Mr. Iwata was, and we had a number of exchanges with him over the years. Obviously, being so far apart was a challenge, but we spoke to him on a number of occasions about a variety of projects, and he was you could tell he was always at the next level. He and Mr. Moto were just the perfect team. And his, Mr. Iwata's background as a developer in the trenches, he knew what it was like. He knew what we were going through. And as our Japanese partners would remind us every now and then, one of their favorite sayings was, "The artist must suffer." And Mr. Iwata knew that suffering. He knew the hard work of being a developer, and we respected him at a level I don't think I've ever seen a development team view a CEO at. I mean, he was just he was literally our patron saint.
Because it's probably quite common in the gaming industry where CEOs don't actually come from the game development level. They're not really from the trenches always, so they probably don't fully understand what a game developer has to go through, right?
Right. Oh yeah. In fact, some CEOs and executive staffs kind of look on the developers, especially coming out of the '90s when the developers were they kind of looked at developers as the help. These were the kids that smelled a little off, that had been living in their mom's basement until they were 25 years old, and the industry was in a huge process of maturation. And I think people like Mr. Iwata and his acknowledgement of the developers as valuable contributors and team members rather than just the help was really led a reformation how we treat our development teams now.
Yeah, well, you can see it in the management style as well, right? Because when they were struggling, I think with the Wii U and 3DS, they all took a pay cut in order to avoid making any of the designers redundant. I don't think you'd see that in Western developers. It's unheard of, really.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. So when a game is being designed, is it actually, in terms of the actual design, is it a linear process or more of a non-linear process? So say with Prime 2, I mean, what would be the area that would be focused on first? I mean, are you starting with something like Sanctuary Fortress, or are you starting with the opening where it actually starts? Or is it all over the place and then somehow you find a way to mesh it all together?
Well, with Prime 2, the success of Prime and the template, the prototype that it provided as from an experiential standpoint was a guideline. But even before that, we still had the original 2D Metroids as templates to look at, and Mr. Sakamoto was also available and very helpful at times as we were taking a look at how a story should unfold, the retraversal aspects and so forth. So even though we weren't interfacing with him on a daily basis, he was still a resource for us. I equate the experience of development, no matter what you're working on, no matter what the IP, no matter how many numbers after the IP name, to making big rocks into little rocks. It is a lot of hard, grueling work. Just keep banging on something until you get it to a manageable shape.
Can you give me an example?
Let's see. The one that hopefully doesn't involve people trying to throttle each other. Let's see. Sure. The hyper mode, for instance, in Prime 3 was one of the more hotly debated aspects between Retro Studios and our partners in Japan. Mr. Tanabe had been forwarding hyper mode as something that he was very passionate about. And the initial implementations that we were undergoing based on that guidance was in our minds as Western developers had a lot of issues. And so that went through, I would say the better part of a year, going back and forth, massaging the values, the experience, the timing, where it would happen, how it would happen. it was if I and the rest of the guys with the Prime 3 team, feel free to call me out on this, but I seem to remember a full year from the time we initially talked about it until the time we were in consensus across both offices as to this is what we can go with.
So what was so much of the discussion about? Was it balancing?
It was a lot of balancing, and a lot of risk reward consideration. Right from the onset, and in fact, it was Mark Haig Hutchinson himself who called out some concerns about the willingness of the player to use hyper mode in its the way we currently understood and had quantified it as being very risky. With a reward payout that he didn't feel in particular was up to the risk, and we went back and forth on this with Mr. Tanabe in particular on it quite a bit. Went through dozens and dozens of subsequent builds and examples to go through it before we got to a place where it turned out to be. I'm happy to say it turned out to be a really solid feature of Prime 3.
Yeah. Because I think I remember reading somewhere as well is actually coming up with the control scheme for Prime 3 took about, 9 months, was it?
Yeah. It was really funny because, and I keep calling out rest his soul, Mark HH again, but we were the first, if I recall correctly, we were the first Western developer to see the Wii Remote. And when I say Wii Remote, it was like this thing that looked like, what if an electronics shop exploded? And but Mark was in his office, door shut, with a sign on it, do not knock. And we had to keep it in a safe. And he was responsible for creating our APIs, our interfaces with that controller. It was both exasperating because I didn't know what he had either. But we had a suspicion, but Mark in his very cool British format would come and be incredibly imperious and arrogant to us. I know what you don't. you peasant colonists. he was such a great teammate, and it was really funny when we. I think it was Mr. Takeda who we were talking to, was one of the hardware, the senior hardware executives there, about the initial Wii format or the Wii specs. I remember Jack Matthews in particular. This was at an E3, if I recall correctly. Jack Matthews was like, we knew what the Xbox 360 was going to have. We knew what the PS3 was going to have, and the initial specs we were looking at, it's like, this is not competitive, from a spec and the hardware standpoint, memory standpoint, all these disadvantages we had, and we were a little concerned, to be blunt. And then, ta-da! They rolled out the Wii Remote, and we kind of in unison, the whole team went, "Oh, okay." And I made everybody was watching at the E3 where the Wii was rolled out, and the stampede when they opened the door of people running right past the Sony PS3 display to get in line to the Nintendo display to play the Wii U. We're like, okay, yes, we understand now. we'll be quiet.
Well, I suppose at the time, right? I mean, because hindsight is always 20/20. I think a lot of people were thinking the same thing, and then. I don't think, probably, obviously, the higher-ups of Nintendo foresaw it exploding like the way it did. But, yeah, I can understand how you might have some reservations at first.
I think this really falls back to Mr. Iwata and one of the he was very much a proponent of the blue ocean strategy. Don't go to the red ocean where you're where it's crawling with pirates and you're facing a competitive disadvantage with the other players there. Go to the blue ocean. Go to where they're not. And he also recalled frequently the book The Innovator's Dilemma, which if anybody's out there is interested, is a fantastic book for ideation and business creativity. And the Wii remote in particular, I think, personified not only the tenets that came out of those considerations, but how Mr. Iwata himself parsed those sensibilities to the development teams.
So how have you taken all this stuff on to Deck Nine Games? All this stuff. Like, how have you tried? I mean, because you've only been in the role, what, 6 months? 6 months? 7 months?
That's about it. Yes, I'm an old hat there now.
Yeah. So how have you taken all this, everything that you've learned over the years, and applying it to Deck Nine Games? Because obviously, Life is Strange: True Colors has just recently come out.
Yeah, happy to say, in fact, it's getting really good reviews. In fact, some of the strongest reviews, if not the strongest reviews of any games in the series. I went over to Deck Nine for one of the more notable reasons is that was a area of games, the narrative game, the story-driven game, truly story-driven.
That's right.
Not when I say story-driven, I don't mean something you read while the background level is loading. Truly story-driven games, cinematic and theatrics, with Hollywood-level production values. I'd never done that before. Yeah, we'd have cutscenes, we'd have stories, we'd have cinematics and so forth, but not at this level. And I've always strongly believed that growth requires doing something that you haven't done before, period. Not just doing something over and over until you get better at it, but doing something entirely different. If it's in the gym, if it's whatever you're doing, read a book that's entirely outside of what you enjoyed previously, and that's what Deck Nine really represented to me. Great team, really fantastic culture, and being able to provide snippets of the experience that I took away of the creative process and the development process that we had at Retro, the rhythm and discipline, the production, the focus on tools and so forth. Being able to provide some insights based on my experience there to the team at Deck Nine has been really enjoyable.
Because does story really cause a lot of delays? Like, with so much time is spent on story, because everything has to revolve around it. Like, when story is like the main point of a game, because then everything has to be built around it, right? So as opposed to a gameplay option where you can kind of just move stuff around on the fly.
Right. On Metroid Prime, for instance, I'd say the story was about 15% of the experience.
Yeah.
The other 85% was a story by way of expanding exploration and capabilities, retraversal. Now this new suit allowed you to move into this area which you could only glimpse before, and this area unlocked these other experiences, these new bosses and creatures. That was this story as far as the Prime series goes. But with Deck Nine, it's an entirely different consideration, and I've been really energized at seeing the writing process, the difference in the writing process, and that from a true cinematic standpoint. I mean, these are real, people who have been heavy duty writers and other disciplines and outside of games. Seeing that creative process unfold has been a really valuable and very much enjoyable learning experience for me.
Is there often times, like say from a publisher, where you have to implement something into a game that you really don't want to do it? Like, I don't want to implement this, but the powers that be make you do it.
One of the, having managed projects now for going on 30 years, one of the realities of production is to learn not to say yes or no, but learn to say, we can do that, but here's the cost. It's going to take another 6 months. It's going to cost another $5.5 million. And we're going to have to staff up in these areas to support that, and being able to do so with your receipts. You have to be able to show, and rightfully so, you have to be able to show this is our calculus specifically that goes into these claims. Sometimes the producer will say, "Ooh, okay." The publisher will say, "Yeah, that's more than we think this edition is worth. Forget it." Or what if, and this is the way it usually happens, what can you give us in this amount of time with this amount of money? And that's where the resourcefulness and the resilience of the development team comes in. Okay, we now have 3 months and they're going to give us another $2 million. What can we do? Okay, let's leverage this. Let's put another spin on this. Change the, repurpose perhaps some resources here. That is really the reality of the developer-publisher relationship in across the industry by and large. A lot of negotiating, a lot of horse trading sometimes.
Because what eats up a lot of the budget usually?
Headcount. That's almost if you were looking at a pie chart, that's going to be about 65-70% of the budget. A AAA project right now, cheap AAA project is $1 million a month.
$1 million a month?
Yes. Yeah.
And development, what, usually goes 2 to 3 years, give or take, usually with a AAA game?
Yeah.
$1 million a month. That's a lot of money.
Now, that's just counting headcount. Kind of the business average for headcount is $12,000, $14,000 a month, depending upon what region you're talking about. So apply that as an average times the number of developers on a project times the duration of the project, then throw in $50K a month for rent, insurance, so on and so forth, or what we call SG&A, service group and administration charges on top of that. That can, very quickly add up to a lot of money. Like I said, a cheap AAA project is $1 million a month right now.
Does it help somewhat that a lot of games are sold digitally these days, so that the studio makes more of a profit as opposed to going through stores and discs and so forth?
That's something that has been one of the most encouraging transitions for the business side of the games industry, in that I remember when it was all box goods. So not only did you have to make the game, support the development, you had to duplicate it. The discs were, I think, about 50 cents at the time. You had to put it in a jewel case, or you wanted to take the cheap way out and spend 3 cents for your sleeve. Jewel cases were 10 or 15 cents as well. You wanted to put it into a box. You wanted to put a manual in it. There's a reason that manuals shrunk from I'm dating myself badly, from the early 90s, and you had that glorious Red Baron manual on the PC or the Auto Duel box that had the little toolkit from Origin. If I'm really dating myself now, but now your manuals are online, and there's no boxes. Then not only you're just talking about the cost of goods, there was the product placement, which is where a lot of the invisible money went to games. The retailers demanded top dollar if you wanted a kiosk in the store. That cost money. They didn't do that out of the goodness of their heart. If you wanted front facing, if you wanted your box to face the customers, that cost money. Otherwise, you got the sidewards box. End caps, also a lot of money. Those kind of things. Then you had to consider, okay, not only did the retailers get 35-40% cut just by that, they get their product placement fees. Then there was a 15% reserve on returns for, if people didn't like it and they brought the game back, there was those kind of considerations as well. Thinking at the time, if I recall correctly, $49.95 was considered premium when I worked at EA, and only, maybe $13 of that actually. By the time it trickled through all of the old physical goods, considerations, reservations, cost of goods sold, et cetera, it only came down to about $13 came out as profit. Yeah. I apologize to anybody if my numbers are off, but it was in that area.
That's interesting, because I wouldn't even think that, like, say in retail, how the box is facing would determine, because I thought that was just all marketing from the retailer's standpoint.
Nope. That's publishers paid sometimes a lot of money for those kind of considerations. Now, that's not the case. Although, for instance, there are things such as discoverability, so forth, for digital releases. If you want your release to be seen, Where, is it going to show up on a bestseller list or a top game list or an editor's choice list? And those are the considerations that can take a bite out of the profits, for a developer or a publisher at the end of the day in the digital space.
I don't know if you can answer this because I've read about it, and I don't know if it's true or even if you're allowed to answer it. But I've heard that like some publishers pay out commission based on the Metacritic rating of a game.
I've heard the same thing. I've never worked in an environment like that. Okay. I'm happy to say.
So, do you want to cover Mario Kart 7 a bit? So how did that get off the ground? Because that was it wasn't just solely Retro's project, right? That was
that was a collaborative project. A lot of people don't know that Retro was involved with that. And for instance, we created the majority of the tracks for that game. And on Woohoo Island on level 1, the Ghost Racer is me. I'm the Ghost Racer. Yes,
that's awesome.
I wanted DK. They gave me Princess Peach, so I had to make the best of it. But I was the fastest Princess Peach out there.
Right. Wow.
That was such an amazing project to work on. Working with Mr. Kono and his team for a variety of reasons. One, it was, again, an entirely new platform for us. Great experience on the 3DS, working with an entirely new type of game. And I think Nintendo had recognized our ability to shift so quickly from Prime 3 over to DK and to do a great job with it, that we had that opportunity. They needed help. They were short on resources. We had a buffer in our time frame, and so we dove in. We went over there to get an immersion. I think we were there for 4 days to get an immersion by their team into their tools and development sensibilities, and then we were off and running. We had daily check-ins, as far as getting the code back and forth, but it was just a fantastic game. Mr. Kono is the real deal as well. He can drive. What's even a funny little anecdote is later in the project, as we were testing out, we were helping them test the internet play. So we were up kind of late here in Austin playing across the internet with players in Japan as well as in Europe. We were stress testing how their latency correction was working in particular, and we were having a lot of fun with it. And we had some of the team, the EAD Mario Kart 7 team, was sitting with us in Austin, and a couple of them stiffened up a little bit. And then I looked down, and there was Mr. Iwata's me in the game, and Mr. Iwata was joining our game. And
did he beat you?
Like a redheaded stepchild. My hot button with Mario Kart has always been Lakitu and that ink spot, and I think he got me with that about 6 times in that game. But yes, he did get me on that one. He didn't win that race, if I recall correctly, but yes, it was. It just kind of reinforced what kind of person Mr. Iwata was, that he's going to join in a play test, with developers around the world to help stress test this title. And it went on to be a very successful title for Nintendo. It was a huge privilege to work on that.
Yeah, so because with designing just one level, do you have to storyboard, I suppose, the track first and then work out how you're going to design it? Like what is the actual process? I mean, would it be the same with every single track?
A lot of the tracks that we worked on, it was 21 total tracks, if I recall correctly. A lot of the tracks that we worked on had examples from prior versions, going all the way back to the original on the SNES. So we had those examples to start with, those layouts. And it was the job of our environment artists and our designers to emulate those as much as possible, to capture the spirit of those, if not the direct layout, but to enhance those, especially because we had flying in the game for the first time. So there was, and they did great. That's one of the great things about Retro Studios is these guys were passionate about Nintendo games, all kinds of Nintendo games. I mean, even going back to some that never made it to the US. And we had huge DK fans, we had huge Prime fans, we had huge Mario Kart fans. And I'm sorry to say, the last time I had played a Mario Kart was like in the SNES. I hadn't touched it since. So I was getting, just worked for like 3 or 4 months, trying to keep up with these guys who just instinctively knew all about the game. They could play it in their sleep and still beat me. So that was a bit of a humble pie for me, but it was still a lot of fun.
Yeah. Because obviously it still continues on, because with each Mario Kart game, they remake some of the older games. So it's cool to see the tracks that you guys did in beautiful HD and stuff. That's definitely amazing.
And it was our first chance to work alongside other real Nintendo developers, a true Nintendo development team. We had spoken to them off and on a little bit through the years, just mostly professional introductions and so forth. But we were working side by side with these guys. And what was perhaps most gratifying to us is, as they started to see the tool sets that we were using, the processes that we were using, how we tracked and coordinated our efforts, they were very envious, and they're like, "Gosh, we need to do this. We need to emulate this. We need to start setting some of these processes up." And that was really vindication for what I had been proposing very early on at Nintendo, was how to be more efficient. How to take advantage of the time that we have to be better, to make better content faster, and while still honoring, of course, the time-honored Nintendo creative process. And the process that we had in place by the time the Mario Kart team was coming over to visit us was running at a really smooth clip, and seeing and hearing their admiration for this process and their desire to take it back and integrate it into their disciplines was really gratifying for us. It told us that, okay, not only did we, knock it out of the park with DK, not only were we given the opportunity to work on Mario Kart 7, these people are, we're learning from them, but they're also learning for us. And that was just a hugely gratifying moment when we realized that we were something besides the kids in the corner. I mean, we were true peers. That was incredible.
I think the industry needs more of that, to be honest, more East and West kind of collaboration, because I think both sides can learn a lot from each other. They both
strongly
have their,
agree.
Pros and cons, right?
Strongly
so
agree.
did you actually have to fly to Japan often to sit in with them?
We for Mario Kart 7, we only went there once for that immersion.
Right.
And they came to visit us a couple of times, and when not a very large team, it's about 3 or 4 of them at the most, would come over about every 3 months, if I recall correctly. So we would usually go to Japan for a product kickoff, a product after action review, or a major rollout, such as the Wii U. To get some exposure to that. So I think I went to Japan 6 times total while I was there. So almost 9 years. I went about 6 times total.
And how long was the duration while you were there?
About a week.
Okay, that's a decent amount.
Yeah,
Not much jet lag. Too much.
Yeah. We got to work in the hospital, what they call their headquarters building, the hospital.
Yeah, it does look like a bit of a hospital building, doesn't it? Yeah. They could easily disguise it as one, yeah.
The first time we walked in, I felt like such a yokel as I'm walking around slack-jawed with all this, gleaming white marble and stainless steel everywhere, with not a poster to be found anywhere.
Wow. So if there's like one pivotal moment or one specific moment that really resonates with you in regards to your tenure at Retro, is there a specific one that comes to mind?
When we were in Kyoto for the kind of the after action on Donkey Kong, we were talking to Mr. Iwata, and Mr. Miyamoto was in the room, and this was when we were also getting our kickoff, if I recall correctly, for or no, I'm sorry, this was December of 2010. So it was before we got the kickoff for Mario Kart, and Mr. Iwata congratulated us on the completing Donkey Kong, and how impressed he was with the project, which was just amazingly gratifying. But I remember he looked at Mr. Miyamoto and he said, "Do you ever remember any Nintendo game completing ahead of schedule?" Which we had done. We had finished all the versions, including the Japanese version, ahead of schedule. Not by much, but we did ahead of schedule. And Mr. Miyamoto, who has had 500 years in the industry at the time, he just kind of looked and he shook his head no, and Mr. Iwata said, "I don't either." And so that was perhaps the most gratifying of all the challenges that we'd gone through, all the hard work, the late nights, agonizing through introducing new processes and improving them, learning some hard lessons, making some mistakes. When two of the most pivotal people in the history industry give such a soft spoken compliment, that was quite a lot of vindication for an awful lot of work.
Yeah. Well,
I get a little choked up. Now that I think back, that was quite a day.
Yeah. Well, what you would have been involved in and what you had to deal with. I don't think it's a coincidence that Retro's biggest and most consistent output was while you were there. I think that's, I know you're a humble guy, but I think, and this goes for all the Retro team as well. I think you guys were all just a perfect team, perfect caliber of people as well. You had a great team to work with, and you got the greatest thing on your resume, right?
I think Tim Little, who's the engineering director there at Retro, I actually worked with Tim much earlier on some projects when I was at Origin EA here in Austin, and we were really fortunate to bring him on starting with the DK project. Tim had a great saying. He says, "I'd much rather have a superstar team than a team full of superstars." And there's the wisdom in that is a team full of superstars is usually not a very good team. The group at Retro Studios didn't have anybody that put on a turtleneck and got on a stage and a TED Talk with a microphone and gave these really smarmy, pandering dissertations on game development. They didn't come in and leer at each other about creative differences. They were just a group of earnest, hardworking, respectful, resourceful, and resilient people. And I think that is one of the things I've taken away most from my experience at Retro is that people in the right environment with a little bit of support, they don't need much, can achieve so much more than the sum of their individual skills. It's astonishing. So Retro Studios was a superstar team, but by no means a team full of superstars.
Yeah. So going forward with Deck 9 Games, what's in the pipeline? Well, you probably can't say much, but as this NDAs and secrets in development. But I suppose you guys are looking to the horizon.
Yeah, we're relaunching Wing Commander. No. No, I can't say what's on the horizon, but I am very much looking forward to seeing what our current project that I'm working with, projects that I'm working with on moving forward come out. I think people, especially people that are fans of these narrative, story-driven games, they'll really enjoy it.
Yeah. Well, Deck 9's lucky to have you.
Thank you.
And I'm sure they appreciate it as well. So if anyone wants to keep up to date with you or anything that you're involved in, what's the best way for them to do that?
Let's see. Yeah, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn, and I will. My personal email is walker34@aol.com. I'm happy to hear from you.
Cool.
Please don't send me spam.
Well, that's what the spam folder is for, right? So,
and anybody that makes jokes about my AOL email,
You're a veteran, man. You're keeping it old school.
We actually had, that was the interwebs before the interwebs.
Yeah. Oh well, it shows. Just say it shows your wisdom. There you go.
And then they need to stay off my lawn too.
Well, Bryan, this has been a privilege. Thank you so much for taking the time out. You're a master of what you do. I respect you graciously and all the retro team. You guys were a big part of my youth, my adolescent years. So I very much appreciate all the hard work that you did. It's much appreciated.
I'm here as a representative of a group of great people. I still talk to them, a lot of them today. They've a lot of them gone off to do great things in other places, but the time at Retro Studios working with such a fantastic group of developers will always be have a special place in my heart.
I'm glad it does. Well, that's the show, everyone. Make sure you share, like, and subscribe. Keep an eye on Deck 9 Games. They will be doing some even greater things, I'm sure. And Bryan will be at the helm. But that is the show. Bryan, thanks again.
Take care. Take care, Reese.
See ya.